This is part 7 of Federalist number 6. This is the more necessary where the frame of the government is so compounded that the laws of the whole are in danger of being contravened by the laws of the parts. In this case, if the particular tribunals are invested with a right of ultimate jurisdiction, besides the contradictions to be expected from difference of opinion, there will be much to fear from the bias of local views and prejudices and from the interference of local regulations. See, he's still talking about the judiciary and why we need to be able to have a uniform laws and a uniform centralized legal system to be able to answer some of the difficulties that America will face if she doesn't unite. When he says particular views here, he's talking about different states. It says, well, every state is going to have its prejudices, its views on things, what is customary there, what they're used to. Then before you know it, you'll have 13 different views of looking at things, 13 different decisions by different courts of these states, and that will create chaos. As often as such an interference was to happen, there would be reason to apprehend that the provisions of the particular laws might be preferred to those of the general laws, from the deference with which men in office naturally look up to that authority to which they owe their official existence. And if you were to go with the courts of states, those courts, those judges will always look with deference. They pay more attention to what their people and what their state legislatures will say rather than what the people across the border will say. So they will be biased. They are not going to put the what is best for all the 13 states ahead of what's best for their state. So he says this is just something that's going to happen. If we leave the Confederacy the way it is, we will be asking for trouble because there will be 13 different legal systems. The treaties of the United States under the present Constitution are liable to the infractions of 13 different legislatures and as many different courts of final jurisdiction acting under the authority of those legislatures. The faith, the reputation, the peace of the whole Union are thus continually at the mercy of the prejudices, the passions, and the interests of every member of which it is composed. Is it possible that foreign nations can either respect or confide in such a government? Is it possible that the people of America will longer consent to trust their honor, their happiness, their safety on so precarious a foundation? In this review of the Confederation, I have confined myself to the exhibitions of its most material defects, passing over those imperfections in its details by which even a considerable part of the power intended to be conferred upon it has been in a great measure rendered abortive. It must be by this time evident to all men of reflection, who are either free from erroneous prepossessions or can divest themselves of it, that it is a system so radically vicious and unsound as to admit not of an amendment, but by an entire change in its leading features and characters. He says anybody who's reflective, anybody who's fair-minded, with all the problems that we've been talking about that the Confederacy has, they can't help but understand that we needed to change the whole system. Remember, anti-federalists are constantly attacking them. Who gave you the authority to change the system? We had a good constitution. Why did you change the system? And he says, this is anybody with reflection, anybody without bias will come to understanding that this system needed to be changed. And it's a system radically vicious. Now, vicious nowadays, we use it like for a vicious dog, somebody that attacks others and stuff. But here, it's in the sense of something that's full of vice. Remember, we've been talking about vices of the political system of the United States. Vicious in that sense means full of vice, what is awful for the system. The organization of Congress is itself utterly improper for the exercise of those powers which are necessary to be deposited in the Union. A single assembly may be a proper receptacle of those slender, or rather fettered authorities, which have been heretofore delegated to the federal head. But it would be inconsistent with all the principles of good government to entrust it with those additional powers which even the moderate and more rational adversaries of the proposed Constitution admit ought to reside in the United States. If that plan should not be adopted, and if the necessity of union should be able to withstand the ambitious aims of those men who may indulge magnificent schemes of personal aggrandizement from its dissolution, the probability would be that we should run into the project of conferring supplementary powers upon Congress as they are now constituted. And either the machine, from the intrinsic feebleness of its own structure, will molder into pieces in spite of our ill-judged efforts to prop it, or by successive augmentations of its force and energy, as necessity might prompt, we shall finally accumulate in a single body all the most important prerogatives of sovereignty, and thus entail upon our posterity one of the most execrable forms of government that human infatuation ever contrived. Thus we should create in reality that very tyranny which the adversaries of new constitution either are or affect to be solicitous to avert. So he says, if we don't fix this, and if we fool ourselves, and if we think we can just change a couple of things in our old constitution, we're fooling ourselves. We're just creating a machine that will go for a little while, but before you know it, every part of it will break apart, and our future prosperity will be in so much danger because we were short-sighted and did not do what we needed to do for posterity, for future generations. It has not a little contributed to the infirmities of existing federal system that it never had a ratification by people. Okay, this is very important. This is our old system put the ratification in the hands of the state legislature. He says in the new system, we're going to send it to the special ratifying conventions that people have elected delegates for. This way, it will become what we will call the basic or supreme law of the land. As I said before, this is a unique contribution that Americans made to constitutional making. Resting on no better foundation than the consent of the several legislatures. It has been exposed to frequent and intricate questions concerning the validity of its powers, and has in some instances given birth to the enormous doctrine of a right of legislative repeal. Owing its ratification to the law of a state, it has been contended that the same authority might repeal the law by which it was ratified. However gross a heresy it may be to maintain that a party to a compact has a right to revoke that compact, the doctrine itself has had respectable advocates. The possibility of a question of this nature proves the necessity of laying the foundations of our national government deeper than in the mere sanction of delegated authority. The fabric of American empire ought to rest in the solid basis of the consent of the people in capital letters. The streams of national power ought to flow immediately from that pure, original fountain of all legitimate authority. In other words, by sending this new constitution to the ratifying conventions, to special ratifying conventions, we are telling people that they are the fountain of power, that they are the sources of power, not the legislature, but people themselves. That's why we want to take the ratification of the new constitution out of the hands of the state legislatures, because majority of those members are selfish. They're waiting for benefits to themselves, putting money in their deep pockets, and not thinking of your future, long-term future, of yourself and posterity. And in this way, we are giving the world a new system, that new constitutions should be written and consented to or ratified by the people themselves, the people as the ultimate source of power and legitimacy.